I am going to revisit my childhood again today. I'm doing this because I got a nice email from someone who had discovered my New England clam cakes recipe. She was from Rhode Island originally, and she hadn't seen clam cakes in many years. In her email, she also mentioned Rhode Island Doughboys, and I thought, Doughboys, oh my gosh, Doughboys. I haven't thought about Doughboys in years. Mom used to make Doughboys, not good Doughboys. I'll show you how she made them. But we had them for breakfast. There's a Chinese restaurant near where I live, and I have lunch there almost once each week. They have on their steam table where the buffet is, they have some, I think they call these sugar buns. They're little fried pieces of bread dough dusted with sugar. These look like my mom's Doughboys. The word doughboy supposedly doesn't exist outside of Rhode Island. I went through my textbooks, my encyclopedias, my food encyclopedias, nothing. Couldn't find anything on doughboys. But they do exist in a lot of different places, just by different names. For example, if you go onto Google and look up the word Zeppeli, I'll put the name down there for you, Zeppeli, and then look at the images on Google, you'll see them. They're fried dough that are dusted with either Confectioners sugar, or I like to use granulated sugar. So that's what I want to do today, is I want to show you how in New England, in Rhode Island, one of the ways in which they make doughboys. So as the name implies, Rhode Island Doughboys, you got to make dough. So what I have here is 1 cup, which is about 240 milliliters of warm water, lukewarm, not too hot because that'll kill the yeast, but lukewarm is okay. And then 1 packet of yeast, or 1 scant tablespoon. That's what that is, a little bit less than a tablespoon. If you want your doughboys to be really sweet, you can use up to 5 tablespoons of sugar. I don't like them too sweet because I'm going to be putting sugar on the outside. So I have here 1 teaspoon of granulated sugar. I'm going to stir that in, get that dissolved. And then what I have here is 2 cups, which is about 10 ounces, 280 grams of flour. You can use all-purpose flour, you can use bread flour. I'm going to put about half of that in there. Stir that in. And then for oil, you can use 2 tablespoons of canola oil, corn oil, any oil you like. What I'm going to do, as soon as I get this stirred in, is I'm going to melt 2 tablespoons of butter in the microwave, because I think butter would be good in this. But I have to make sure it's just melted and not hot, because I don't want to kill any yeast. Okay, so here's my butter. I melted that for 20 seconds in the microwave, just enough to melt it without getting it too hot. Stir that in. I'm going to add a little bit more of my flour here, I think. I'm adding the flour a little bit at a time, because although I'm using 2 cups of flour, sometimes you need more, sometimes you need less. Different varieties of flour absorb more moisture, some less. Times of the year can affect bread dough. So basically, you work with the flour until you have enough to make a moist, slightly sticky dough. I'm going to let this sit for about 10 minutes. That'll activate that yeast. I'm using active dry yeast. Okay, this has been going for about 10 minutes. It's actually starting to rise. I'm seeing bubbles in there. That's a good indication that the yeast is alive and active. I'm going to add some more flour, and probably more flour even. This recipe seems to be written to use less flour to start and then bring it into a dough with more flour later. So I just added also 1 teaspoon of salt. I'm going to stir this in. Starting to get stringy. That's good. By the way, I think I mentioned, if not, let me mention that I'm using all-purpose flour. You can use bread flour if you want. See, that's a little bit too sticky there. Bread flour has more protein in it, and it's the proteins that hook up to form those gluten chains. And that's why this is already starting to get stringy, because that's the gluten chains building up. That's what gives dough its texture. Helps it to capture bubbles when it rises. Okay. So there's my full 2 cups of flour. Still too wet. I'm going to start adding more flour. And I want to get this to the point where it's a dough that I can knead. I want it to be slightly sticky. I could do this in the stand mixer. Some people say, oh, you got a stand mixer, why don't you use it? I do use it for some videos and not for others, because I try to do things different ways so people can see more than one way of doing something. Okay, that's starting to form a dough. So I'm going to run this onto the counter. Flour my counter. Good. Get some flour on my hand. And then I'm going to start kneading this and get some more flour worked in again until I have a dough that's soft, moist, slightly sticky. And then I'm going to knead this for maybe 3 to 5 minutes until it's smooth. Okay, I've been kneading this now for a few minutes. It's taking on a nice smooth texture. It's slightly sticky without being too sticky. Now, some people will make their doughboys right with the raw dough. They'll start frying it right away, making their shapes and so forth, letting the heat of the oil cause the yeast to activate and make this rise. You can let this rise for an hour, which is what I'm going to do. That'll help to mature the flavor a little bit. So I buttered a bowl lightly. I'm going to place that in there. I want to coat the top with some butter so that when it rises up, it doesn't get all sticky against the plastic that I'm going to put on top. And then I've got a piece of plastic wrap here. I'm going to set this aside and let this rise now for about an hour. This has been rising for exactly 1 hour. My timer just went off. You can see how much that has filled that bowl. And because I buttered the top of that dough, it should peel off fairly well without tearing the dough too much. Like so. Good. All right, I need to get this out of the bowl onto the counter, but before I do that, I want to dust the counter. A little bit of flour. This is just a flour duster. This is actually a powdered sugar duster. I'm going to break that down a little bit by shaking it and then plopping it out. Good. Okay, 2 ways to do this. Some people will flatten this out really well and then fry the flat pieces. Some will keep it inflated a little bit. Try not to break it down too much. I'm going to do it both ways to compare and see how this comes out. But first I need to cut that in half. And for that I'm going to use a bench scraper. Like so. All right. I'm going to set this piece aside, flour it a little bit, set it aside. In the meantime, I'm heating 1 cup, which is 240 milliliters of peanut oil, in my skillet. I've got a big cast iron skillet. And I'm going to heat that to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 190 degrees Celsius. Gonna need to dust that a little bit. All right, I'm going to flatten this piece out. And then I'm going to cut this up to be my doughboys. And you can cut these pieces as big or as small as you like. In fact, I'm going to do it 2 ways. I'm going to cut these smaller have 2 larger pieces and 4 smaller pieces. All right, let's go see how the oil is doing. Meanwhile, the other piece that I have over here on the side, I'm going to let that continue to rise a little bit on its own. I'm going to fry these pieces first. All right, my oil has reached 375 degrees. I'm going to put a few pieces in there. I'm aiming for 375 degrees because at 350, the dough absorbs too much oil, and you get these kind of doughboys that are soaked with oil. I want it to be hot enough to fry the bread dough really well, give me a nice browning without the dough absorbing a lot of oil. I'm looking for browning. I'm using a cast iron pan because that'll help me to maintain a steady heat. My temperature hasn't dropped a whole lot. I'm checking it with a thermometer here. It's still quite high. So the cast iron, because it absorbs heat, it'll help to regulate that heat so you don't have a drastic drop in temperature. I'm going to use a spatula to turn these over. Look how that's nicely browning. Got a big bubble on that one. Just going to push that down, burst it, take the air out. Nicely browned without burning. Cook that another, they cook in maybe a minute or even less than a minute on each side. And again, I'm using peanut oil because peanut oil has a high smoke point, but you could use corn oil, you could use canola oil. I have in the meantime lined a plate with paper towel to absorb the oil as I take these out. So here's my other piece of dough. I'm handling this very lightly because I'm going to try to make this lighter so that it has more of a texture like Krispy Kreme donuts. You know how light those are. So I'm not going to flatten this out a whole lot. Going to cut this up into odd-sized pieces because you can. All right, my temperature has come back up to 375 degrees. Going to lay those in there carefully. You want to let it splatter away from you so that you don't burn yourself with hot oil. And the same thing, minute or so on either side. And then I can transfer it to a plate, again, lined with paper towels. Again, I want to flip these over. And that oil is a little bit too hot. As you can see, that one's a little bit too dark. Just that one, though, it seems like so far, these look okay. Now that'll be fine. So after they've had time to drain on paper towels, but while they're still hot, dust them well with sugar. You can kind of spread it around a little bit as you shake it off. Flip them over. Do the other side. Some of these are a little bit dark. Okay, same thing. Shake them around. All right, and then transfer them to a platter. But I got a mess to clean up here first. So there they are. My Doughboys. Don't they look good? I'm going to try one of these. I think I'm going to have that one there. That looks like it's the smallest one. The rest of these are going to go to my neighbors. They eat well when I do videos. All right, let me try one of these and see what it tastes like. Doughboys. I haven't had Doughboys in so many years. It's been decades. Yeah, that's good. Very light, not too sweet. I don't like them too sweet. That's just what I remember them as when I was a kid living in New England. Okay. Train going by. I promised you that I was going to... I can even feel the ground shake. I'm not that close to the tracks. I promised you that I was going to show you how my mom made Doughboys. Remember these things? Pillsbury biscuits that come in a little tube. Let me show you how Mom made Doughboys. I haven't opened one of these. I haven't held one since I left New England in 1975. If I remember correctly, press spoon at seam to open can. You used to hit it on the counter like that. But it says to use a spoon. Let me try a spoon. Yoo, there it goes. So there they are. Those are the biscuits. They get fried in butter. Let's move to the stove. I've heated a skillet here with clarified butter in it because whole butter will brown before I have a chance to really cook these properly. Lay them in the butter. It's not making a sizzling sound, but that's okay because I'm kind of just baking them. I'm going to actually cover this pan while these are cooking so that they bake, and then when I'm satisfied that they're lightly browned, nicely browned on one side, I'll flip them all over and brown the other side. Okay, I'm ready to turn these over. You can see they're just starting to brown. I'm cooking those, that one overcooked a little bit. The ones toward the center will probably be cooked too dark. There's my timer going off. I'm cooking these 5 minutes per side over medium-low heat because I don't want them to brown too much. I'm actually going to move these to the outside because it's too hot in the middle of the pan. This is an aluminum pan. This doesn't distribute heat as well as that cast iron pan. Okay, 5 minutes on that side and those should be ready to eat. So there's Mom's idea of Doughboys. I want to show you next how we ate those. So we would put some maple syrup. I'm using genuine maple syrup. This time around we had the Aunt Jemima synthetically flavored maple syrup. We would break them apart like that, dip them in the syrup, and that's how we ate them for breakfast. I gotta taste these. It's been, what, 40 some odd years since I've tasted these Doughboys. I'm so curious to see how this is gonna taste. It's been so many years. Yeah. Mom would make these for breakfast sometimes rather than pancakes. I gotta tell you, they taste a bit like chemicals. They do. They taste like there's chemicals in there. Whereas my other Doughboys, where are they? Oh, they're over there because I'm gonna walk them up the street. Those taste fresh and delicious. These are okay, but I would rather have my real Doughboys. For a printable PDF copy of this recipe with step-by-step photographs, visit my website, mobilehomegourmet.com, and look on the home page or in the recipe archive.